Welcome to Thrive and Advance podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shourey Aftahi, and I'm thrilled to introduce our amazing guest today. Retired Captain Mark Brouker, United States Navy, and now founder and president of Brouker Leadership Solutions. Welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear about you and what you've done and where you've been and what you're doing today. So please tell us about your story.
Well, thanks, Shari, for inviting me to do this. This is very exciting for me. Real quick, my story, I was in the Navy many years, 30 years. And early on in my Navy career, I just started noticing, this is probably 8 to 10 years, that my motivation to go to work waxed and waned pretty significantly. Sometimes really fired up to go to work, other times hating to go to work. And I wanted to know why. And I realized it had nothing to do with where I was located. In the Navy, you move every couple of years. Had nothing to do with that. It had nothing to do with the job I had. I came in as a pharmacist and I had different jobs under that umbrella, but it had nothing to do with that. What I really started looking into it was my boss. And that really intrigued me, that this boss had so much influence over me, and I want to know why. So that started, I guess, a journey, lack of a better term, to find out how people could become effective leaders. And I just started reading everything I could get my hands on. And back then they didn't have podcasts and things like that, but I did do a lot of reading, and I came up with some pretty strong feelings about leadership, what worked, and I observed and took notes and just really went kind of deep dive into it. And then about 20 years into my Navy career, about maybe 15 years after I started this investigation of leadership, I was selected to be commanding officer, CEO of a pretty big hospital, Bremerton Naval Hospital up in Washington. Of course, very excited when I got that call, and frankly, pretty shocked. But then about 3 days before the ceremony, when I was going to take over the hospital, I couldn't sleep. I was tossing and turning in bed. I had one of those restless nights we all have. And I was very concerned about this whole thing, and woke my wife up, of course, and she looked at me. She goes, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I'm nervous about this command thing." She asked me, "What are you nervous about?" I said, "Well, Chris, here's the deal, is I really don't know how to run a hospital." And she looked at me with only a look of another spouse could give another spouse. The truth is, that really wasn't an overly dramatic statement. I knew a lot about healthcare. I knew about pharmacy, of course, but there were so many other people more qualified than I was to have that job. I knew it and other people knew it. But my wife looked at me, Chris, and she said, you've been studying leadership your whole life. I suggest you just be the best leader you can be, and we'll see what happens. And that was very wise counsel. And that's exactly what I did. While I didn't really know the intricacies of hospital operations, I did employ these behaviors, and there really are behaviors of leadership. And we were very successful, which was really a profound experience for me. And from that job, my last job in the Navy, I was Navy Medicine West Chief of Staff. I had about 12 commanding officers working for me. And those commanding officers who employed these behaviors were more successful than those that did not. Their key performance indicators were higher than others. And that was another really quite influential experience. Retired from the Navy about 6-7 years ago and started my own business, and really can dig even deeper into this and come to find out there are a lot of studies that show that these behaviors are quite powerful. And in this season of my life, like you mentioned, I've got my own company, and I'm just so fortunate to do what I love to do. I just love talking to people about leadership and these behaviors that I've come to love. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Well, excellent. It's an exciting story, what you've done and where you've been. Your formal education was in pharmaceutical, correct?
Correct. That's where I got my bachelor's, and that was a big break for me to get into pharmacy school, and that was a springboard for me to get in the Navy, and it was very fortunate.
So when you started diving into leadership, what leadership means and what are the characteristics of an effective leader and all, in that period of time, you basically read books and talked to people and had probably mentors that you bounce things off of, but you didn't really go for a formal education in leadership, but you were very successful in putting those pieces into play in your own leadership journey. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I did get an MBA years ago, and I went to the Naval War College, and I did learn leadership there. But it's more strategic leadership, and again, a great education. I don't disparage it in any way, shape, or form. But what I learned about, behaviors of leadership, how you can get people excited to come to work every day, that's what I learned on my own.
Right. So I guess the reason I bring that up is for everyone to understand you really don't have to go to a school to become a great leader. You just have to be interested enough to read and take notice and experiment with what you learn, and you can be an effective leader
Yeah.
at a high level.
Yeah. And I think the truth is some people would find these behaviors easier to employ than others. It's just human nature. But the truth is, what I learned is you're absolutely right. It takes discipline. The two big things, I guess, it takes discipline and it takes energy. And obviously there's more to it than that, but you don't have to get a Harvard MBA, again, a great degree, don't get me wrong, or get a PhD in leadership. Again, tremendous education to help you along the way. But these behaviors, really anyone can employ, that we talk about in the book I got coming out, and we'll probably talk about during this podcast.
Yes. Yes. So let's talk about your book, because you dive into the behaviors, right? And your book, if I'm not mistaken, is titled Lessons from the Navy.
Correct.
And what principles do you believe are key in being a successful leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's really the essence of it. In a nutshell, Shari, it's at the end of the day, when I came out of the Navy and I started this business, I did a lot of thinking, and I wrote down all the great leaders that I had worked for, and there were many of them. 30 years, obviously, and you have almost every 6 months I had a new leader, so there's a lot of folks on that list. And I looked at it and I said, what was it that they all had in common? And what I concluded was, and this aligned with what I had read, but this is really an independent, I guess, a look at it. I said, they all cared for me. They cared for my well-being as a human being, not just a naval officer. And then I looked into it. I said, what did they do? And it really was just the thought I had. What did they do to make me conclude that? Because it was my decision whether I did believe they cared for me or not. And then that's why I came up with these behaviors. The first thing I said, well, they knew me as a person. They proactively went out of the way to know me as a person. The second thing I came up with is I saw them a lot. They weren't locked in their office. I saw them a lot. The third thing is they treated me with a great deal of respect. If I needed a course correct, if I was doing things I shouldn't have been doing, they were very respectful in that course correct. The fourth thing is they held me accountable. When I did a good job, they told me I did a good job. When I wasn't doing a good job, again, they respectfully brought me into their office and they told me what I was doing wrong. And the fifth thing is they were optimistic. They were pretty upbeat people. And those are the five things. Again, know your people, be visible, be respectful, don't ignore good or poor performance, AKA hold people accountable, and be optimistic. And the last thing I added to the book, because I think it's really important, I just gave a talk yesterday at Rocky Vista University up in Parker, Colorado, and I told these students that these five things we just talked about. It's a 2-hour seminar, and they were very attentive. It's young people are a great crowd because they just want to learn leadership, and these are all going to be doctors. And I said, I'm convinced over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, because you're so attentive, that you're going to be good to go. You're going to pick up the right leadership tool, behave correctly when that crucible moment comes. But 6, 9, 12 months from now, after you forget some of these things, you're more likely to get in those bad habits again. So the sixth thing I talk about is relearning the art of leadership, meaning just like people listen to this podcast, they are investing time to remind themselves of the power of these behaviors, because everything, those five we talked about, are common sense. We learned this in kindergarten, but in the business churn, in the craziness of the day, when bad news comes, do you react appropriately, or do you get angry? And those are crucible moments that drive a culture. In a nutshell, I just to close this out, when I looked at those leaders and I said they all cared for me, the other thing is I had an intense trust in them. I trusted them. And that was I guess the reciprocal part of the relationship, is they cared for me as a human being, and therefore I trusted them. And I worked really hard for them. I worked really hard for those people. I worked hard my entire career, but it was fun working for people that I trusted and knew that they cared for my well-being. So that's the book in a nutshell.
Right. So as they say, with great leadership, you can help people, give them voice, give them a reason to trust. At the same time, they will move mountains for you.
Exactly.
They work hard.
Exactly. And in my seminars and in the book, there's a lot of stories that there's also obviously data that supports. There's so many studies out there that show that each one of those behaviors is, statistically, they will, create a more engaged workforce. So there's data that supports it. But what really gets people excited is to hear the stories, the personal stories of how being visible increases your employee engagement scores and all this other stuff. So fun stuff.
Yeah. So in your opinion and in your experience, all of us in different leadership positions, we have to have many different skills. We have to master many different skills, communication skills, interpersonal skills, functional skills. In your opinion, what are the top skills that a leader has to master to be most effective?
That's a great question. I would say the most important skill any leader, just the one that is prominent in my mind, is listening better. And that's easier. I was talking to, again, these students yesterday up in Parker. They're all young and they were listening so intently. It was so much fun. I mean, I could tell they were zeroed in. But I also give this talk to senior leaders, C-suite leaders, and they listen, but it's just, it's a tougher crowd just because, they're successful by definition. They're making a lot of money. They got a lot of responsibility. So in answer to your question, continuously listen. Listen, Colin Powell, who's one of my great, I'm a big fan of him. I never met him, but I've met people who have met him. And his mantra is listen with your heart. And leaders who are great leaders all are great listeners. And again, that's easier when you're, 23, 24, 25 years old, 30. It's harder when you're 45, 50, and you've got a lot of responsibility, and you can get a little arrogant. Arrogance is poison to a business. So if you continue to listen to your people, by definition, you won't become arrogant. You won't think you're the smartest person in the room. So I think, and the data would support this, that if you listen better, you will become a better leader. And the other thing is, think about it. When you're a CEO of a company, you really don't know what's going on day to day, even as a vice president or even a mid-level manager, but your people know what's going on. They know the issues, they know the problems, and frankly, they know the solutions. So if you create a culture of trust, they'll more likely come to you with those solutions. And again, when you listen to them, listen with your heart, with compassion and empathy, they'll be more likely to come talk with you. So listening is huge. It's huge.
How true that is. Now, most of us, or most leaders, the higher you go, this is probably more impactful when we are challenged or we are facing a challenging situation and we feel stressed. We probably put out behaviors that are not our best.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it's critical for leadership teams, people, CEOs of large or small organizations, anyone in the leadership, truly, that we understand that at times when we're stressed, we have to pause and make a decision, address the data, make the decision, and be able to move forward. Otherwise, our reaction may devastate our business.
Yes.
So do you have any examples of that, how you did that, or how you helped someone else do that, and what were the specifics?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I guess thinking back, there's a book written by Admiral Stavridis. He's retired 4-star admiral, and his book is called The Leader's Bookshelf. It's a tremendous book. And in it, at the end of this book, he does a really deep dive into leadership. He interviews a lot of senior officers in the military. But he said, at the end of the day, all these great leaders had two things in common. One, they were optimistic, and I'm sure at some point we'll talk about optimism, the important optimism. But in reference to your question, he said all great leaders bring calm out of chaos. So when that crisis hits, they don't panic. They maintain their composure, even though inside there is no doubt in your mind, your stomach is flipping. But in front of your team, you must not lose your composure. The great leaders somehow find that energy, I guess, and discipline to suppress the thought to panic and maintain their composure. And there are so many. Oh gosh, I think of all the great leaders, mostly military, that I've read about. The second book I'm writing about Admiral Nimitz, and during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which is literally, whether you know anything about history or not, it was the largest naval battle in the history of warfare. And during that battle, he said about a month before his death, he kind of confided that he was on pins and needles, quote unquote, but I couldn't show it. He was on pins and needles, but couldn't show it. So during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, I decided to go play horseshoes in the horseshoe pit. So it's an amazing story of a person who, he was an iconic leader, but even he got nervous. So we're all going to get nervous. We're all going to be on pins and needles. But in front of your troops, the great ones can suppress that and just show composure, confidence, not arrogance, but confidence, and you can move forward. And in that environment, think about it, people are you can't make all the decisions. At some point, you're going to have to make a decision in this crisis, but you want to get input from your people so you can balance the different ideas. And if you maintain your composure, you're creating a culture immediately that you're going to be approachable. They'll give you their thoughts. And at some point, you're going to have to make a decision. And that's just, what you're getting paid for. But you'll make a better decision with input and listening to your people. I guess a personal story that happened was we were in Bremerton, and there was a Haiti earthquake. I think this was a 2010 or 11, a devastating earthquake. And I got a call from my boss in San Diego, and they told me that, hey, we're going to have to take about half of your C-suite to go on this deployment to go help the folks in Haiti. And that caused a lot of consternation among many people. You have your C-suites leaving. And I remember we had a meeting on a Saturday, and I was obviously pretty nervous about this. But I had just read, I can't remember which book it was, a book about a military leader who maintained his composure in a moment of crisis, and it was much more critical than I was dealing with. This was in battle. But it made me realize, I said, Mark, when you go to this meeting, you've got to, again, my stomach was flipping. I was on pins and needles. But because I had reminded myself through this reading the night before, it just helped me maintain my composure. I got good feedback from my folks, and we got through that. And what happened, truthfully, is they never left. It was really a drill. They decided to send another team to Haiti. But it was a good reminder for me to, when the chips are down, to maintain your composure.
That's right. So our people look to us for strength, for stability, and for answers. Yep. And you can maintain that, and we can help the team succeed. And it's best of both worlds when you don't have to lose them anyway.
That's right. It was a blessing they didn't get to go.
Excellent. So let's talk about military and civilian life. In my experience, and those that I've encountered, is a difficulty in coming out of military and being able to mesh in to the civilian life. But there are many transferable skills that comes along, and you can really go from one life to another. Tell us about that transition, because we have so many people that have honorably served in military, and now they're pursuing a civilian life, but they feel somewhat lost. How to adjust? What's your advice?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Any transition is difficult. And it's so trite to say that, but I don't think, I know generally people don't appreciate that. And I think of professional football players and baseball players. And my daughter she played volleyball, and she played volleyball at pretty high level in Division I. And she played for 13 years of volleyball, and 22 years old, all of a sudden it's all over. And that was a challenging transition for her. So we all go through transitions, and certainly the military, the civilian world was a struggle for me. It was very, very challenging. I didn't appreciate the challenge of it. And by by good luck, I get to volunteer at this group called the Honor Foundation to help Navy SEALs and Special Forces transition, and I can give back, and hopefully they have a smoother transition than I do. But any transition is difficult, and certainly military to civilian. But I guess some of the things that the military brings is, I mean, the prominent one is leadership. We in the military, both the Air Force, Navy, and Army, and Air National Guard, all of them, Coast Guard, there is a emphasis on leadership. That as an officer, even non-commissioned officer, senior enlisted, they get a lot of leadership training, and I can't compare it to the civilian world, but I do know that there's some tremendous leaders coming out of the military who understand this stuff. They understand that maintaining your composure is extremely important, and some of these men and women have been in some incredibly difficult positions as young people, and they've done amazing work. And you think of what we did in Iraq, whether you believe that war was the right thing to do or not, it's not. It's over, thank goodness. But the men and women in during those years of battle, only because America is so open, there were newsmen and women following them, and yes, we had the Abu Ghraib disaster, but other than that, these men and women did amazing work in incredibly difficult situations. And I'm sure Facebook has issues, challenges, and Apple has challenges, and these men and women have been through a lot of stuff. And I just encourage people to hire veterans because they've gone through some incredibly difficult situations, and they can help any company get through them.
Right. In my research and encounters with military or people retiring from military and entering a civilian life, what I've understood is that about the last 2 decades or so, the military culture has changed. It's not a culture of leading by force, leading by title, leading by fear, but it has changed to leading by leadership, which is really different. So I don't know if you experienced both or not, but what's your view of that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can't say in my experience that I saw a change. I don't recall. I came in 1983, so we're talking a few years ago, and retired in 2013. I could say in my experience, I didn't see that the severe top-down, traditional, what people think of the military as, give me 50 push-ups and screaming and yelling and all that stuff. That just wasn't my experience. I saw a plethora of leaders. I saw some who led that way. I saw some who didn't lead that way. And the same thing in 2013. I saw some leaders who led top down and others that didn't. And I just noticed that the ones who didn't were more successful. But so I haven't seen a transformation, at least my own experience. There's a book. Oh my goodness, what's the name of that book? Joker 1. Mm-hmm. Donovan Campbell wrote a book. He's a young man who went into the Marines after 9/11. He actually went at Princeton, and great book, Joker 1. And in that book, there's a quote where he says that he had a leadership transformation. He thought when he joined the Marines that everyone thinks it's screaming and yelling. It certainly is that going on. I'm not saying it's not. But what he said, and there's a quote that I use, he used words like, I had to show mercy, tenderness, love, compassion. And I show that in my seminars, some of them. And without saying who the source is, I say, who do you think said this? And they always say, well, it's probably a social worker or a kindergarten teacher. And the next thing I show a picture of Lieutenant or Captain McNabb or Donovan Campbell, and he's looking like a Marine, but it came from him. So, I think like any other organization, those organizations that take care of their people, and certainly the Marines are tough, but they take care of their Marines, they're more successful. So it's a great question, and I don't have any data to say what the Navy or the military has transformed over the last 20 years or so. I just noticed that those leaders who took care of their people were more successful than those that didn't.
That's right. We don't equate the general population. We don't equate military with heart-centered leadership. And that's the new language for the type of leadership you're referring to. So it's nice to know that in reality, that's how military functions. And that is a great skill and experience to transition into the leadership roles within civilian life,
Yes.
because it just helps the organizations to grow further. Having said that, so can you share maybe one or two lessons you learned from a very strong mentor that you respect?
Yeah, yeah. I thinking, your question of a couple minutes ago about, how I came to where I grew with this leadership stuff. I made that list of all these great leaders, and they were all mentors for me. And again, what they had in common was they took care of their people. And I learned of so many great things from all those different people, and most of them I still keep in touch with them. I guess the last leader I had, he went on to become the Surgeon General. Just a tremendous leader. He was, I was his chief of staff. He was the boss. He was CEO. I was COO of this region. And this guy was always optimistic. And I never saw him in a bad mood. He was always upbeat. And I just saw, and I kind of could tell sometimes, I couldn't really tell, but knowing what he was going through, because I was exposed to the same information he had, I'm thinking, how can this guy be upbeat? I mean, there wasn't a lot of stuff going on. We had wars going on. We had a lot of transition going on in between 2011 and 2013. But he taught me that the importance of staying upbeat, and I just call it optimism generally. And what I'd like to tell people is based on that experience from that tremendous mentor, is you be optimistic, fake it, or don't show up. And that faking it sometimes gets some consternation, thinking, well, you're gonna lose credibility. And I know when my boss faked it, and I could tell sometimes he didn't lose any credibility with me. I knew he was doing it for us because he loved us and he did not want to let us down. Almost the same thing as, maintaining your composure in times of stress. Same thing with optimism. Sometimes you're going to go to work, life gets messy, or your kids get in trouble, or your spouse is unhappy with different things, and probably very, very warranted. Things, business goes south a little bit. But as a leader, you've got to persevere through those. And in front of your folks, you really do need to maintain an air of optimism. And that's what I learned from my last boss. And there's so much data going back to World War II, where General Marshall in World War II, when he was selecting combat leaders for World War II, the prominent characteristic behavior that he was looking for was optimism. He wanted optimistic leaders. So this is not something that just came around. It's been around for many, many years.
Yes. So let's talk about the ingredients, right? We talk about leadership or any strategy in business, but we're focusing on leadership today.
Yeah.
You have to have a strategy, how you lead, right? Then you have different ingredients that, you have a recipe, and you have these ingredients that you have to add in one by one. And they're not always the same, because when you manage people, or I should say lead people, different people have different needs. They have different styles. And therefore, as leaders, we have the responsibility to understand that and lead the way they need us to. So having said that, what are the ingredients that you found to be most important in your recipe? And particularly in your situation, because your last job per se in military, you had the C-suite reporting into you, which is at a different level of leadership. So tell us how you manage the differences. At the same time, what are the ingredients that you felt most important to include in your recipe?
Yeah, that's a well, I think honestly that with the last job I had, when I had the commanding officers reporting to me, and I think back when I was a pretty junior officer and I had about a dozen, basically not even mid-level managers, basically individual contributors, most of them pretty young, reporting to me. And they happened to be in Newport, Rhode Island back in the 90s. but I had 12 people reporting me. One were commanding officers and others were individual contributors in their 20s. And the one ingredient that leads to success and the point is, regardless of what group you've got, is knowing your people. And I didn't learn this intently, I guess not intently, proactively getting to know your people. I learned this back, I guess, when I was about 20 years into my Navy career. I did know my people in Newport, Rhode Island, but I didn't get this lesson early enough, frankly. I learned it, again, about 20 years of my Navy career. So the one ingredient that is I think it's so powerful that when you meet an employee for the first time, whether they're a commanding officer who's in their 50s or an individual contributor, 18, right out of Newark, New Jersey, just joined the Navy, or a brand new person joining your team right out of high school, if you spend 30 minutes with them and tell a few minutes about yourself, you tell me your story, how you came. I came from Massachusetts, and I usually tell my story to these folks, but then turn it over to them and say, tell me your story, and intently listen, getting in these listening skills, and just spend time getting to know them as a person, and then have an exchange of ideas. Tell me more. What are your goals, and what do you love to do? And that is such an amazing experience. There's no quicker way to show that you care, and establish a foundation of trust. It doesn't seal a deal, but it is such a powerful behavior that, frankly, at least in my experience, I always ask people when I give a seminar, how many, after I present this behavior, I ask people, how many people have experienced this? How many people had bosses when you first met them, they didn't go through the do's and don'ts of the job. They just said, we're not going to do that. We're just going to get to know one another. And it's probably about 15%. So this is a major way to build trust, to leverage this to really build a team that's very tight and trusts you. So in answer to your question, that's the one that is, frankly, is money on the table, because most companies don't employ this. Those that do, and there's a lot of data that supports this. Great Places at Work is one of them. They've done studies for many years. Those companies where the bosses and the managers, the leaders proactively get to know their people, they're more successful. So it's a very, very powerful behavior to get into.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned your seminars, and you were just in my neck of the woods, right? You were just in Parker.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. Now, tell us a little bit about what you do now. How are you putting this wealth of information to use in helping other people be better leaders? So what do you do in your organization?
Yeah, well, that's a great. Well, here's the deal. When you love what you do, as you do, I know you love what you do, Shari, and it's a beautiful thing. As I do, I honestly work harder now than I ever did in my life, and that means that I had some pretty high level jobs, and which were pretty demanding. But I am just always thinking about leadership. I'm always watching. I watch sports, and I watch the coaches on the sidelines, how they're acting, how the quarterback's acting, and I'm just find the whole thing just fascinating. So what I do, I'm on the road quite a bit. I just, as a matter of fact, apparently Google has this little app where it tells you how many where you've been the last year. In 2019, apparently I flew around the earth 5.5 times. I had no idea, but it was pretty interesting to see that. It showed you all the places you went. So I'm on the road a lot. And I give talks on leadership, and I do pro bono work if organizations, for whatever reason, can't pay. If I don't have something else going on, I'll give the talk. To me, the message is the most important thing. I think this is I know this is an extremely important message. I've got a book coming out that we mentioned, Lessons from the Navy. Roman and Littlefield is the publisher, and that'll be out in October of 2020. That book's basically done. We're going to do the final edits and stuff, but the project I'm working on now is about Admiral Nimitz, this leader who won the war in the Pacific in World War II, and somehow without any social media, without any, this 1940, so there's really no antiquated technology, but I've interviewed about, a couple of dozen World War II veterans who are still alive. These are 95-year-old men. It's just so much fun talking to these guys. and they were young men. And I asked them, tell me about Admiral Nimitz. And they say, this guy was great. He cared for us. We trusted him. And they just loved this guy. And I asked him, I said, did you ever meet him? He said, no, I've never met him. I was a 21-year-old kid from Kansas. He was a 4-star admiral. And it's intriguing to me how this man created this intense culture of trust and loyalty over literally half the planet Earth with 2 million men. So that's the project I'm working on now. Hopefully the passion in the project is coming out, because it is so much fun learning what this man did to create this intense level of trust. And so that's what I'm doing now. And I have a blog I put out once a month through my my website. And I'll just go ahead and shamelessly mention it. It's Brouker Leadership Solutions. It's Brouker, Brouker, leadershipsolutions.com. And once a month, I put a blog out. You can go to that website, sign up for it. And it's a one page. I don't go into a lot of stuff, but it's just common sense, practical, easily applicable behaviors. Usually with a story and maybe some data, but usually it's a fun fact, and people just read these and go, yeah, it makes sense. And they just a reminder of the importance of these behaviors. So I'm busy, but I love what I do. And I got to get into this podcasting. So this is an awesome opportunity for me. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us, and your contact information will be listed. So individuals that need to reach out and get more of you and your expertise will have that opportunity. In closing, is there anything we didn't talk about that we should?
No, I guess the last thing I just say is you know, I guess the thing is, things worked out for me, and I'm very, very fortunate, very blessed. But there were many times where, people said some things to me. They said, you can't do that. Discouraging things. I didn't get opportunities that I believe I was, I should have come my way. But point is, life is not fair. You're going to get knocked down. You're not going to get the job you want and you deserve, and frankly, you're probably qualified for. But you just got to get over it. Life is not fair. And those who can get off the mat and just maybe even get angry or saying, I'm going to prove them wrong, those are the ones who are going to persevere. So I guess it's just important to know that, you're going to get curveballs, you're going to get discouraging comments your way. You just got to put a helmet on and get through it. And then I guess that's the last thing I just want to mention, because it wasn't, it sounds like it was a really smooth journey for me. And it was, I'm tremendously blessed and fortunate, but there were some times where some challenges came my way, and we got through them.
Right. And most important is, if you are doing what you're passionate about, then there is no way you wouldn't succeed.
So, good. That's a great way to end it. And one thing I will say, I do a lot of mentoring for folks coming out of the military, and I just say, find something you're passionate about. Because when you find something you're passionate about, you do, it's just easier. It's hard to do, to find that passion, but again, that's what as you mentioned, when you're passionate about it, you can get through a lot of tough times.
That's right. Thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate you being with us. The time you spent with us is treasured. And till next time.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.